Hello, Goodman Games fans. Welcome to another episode of The Scrivenery. I am one of your hosts, Ed Stanek.
And I'm your other host, Trevor Stamper. And we have with us today Bob Brinkman, well
Hey,
known
everybody.
for his writing in various, DCC settings. Bob has come to us today to not talk about writing at all. He's come today to talk to us about the business side of third-party publishing, something we've never seriously covered in any depth. But it's a topic that I know I have wanted to get on the Scrivenery for quite a while. I'm pretty sure Ed is the same mind. So, Bob, everybody knows you as writing, Skull and Crossbones classics. There's a couple ores out there that have your name on them, and plenty of modules and stuff like this and everything. But there's another side to you. Can you tell us about that? Why is it that we want to talk to you about the business side of third party publishing?
It's because I'm a real wizard. I can cast Cure Insomnia. I've been a business and tax professional for over 20, coming up on 25 years now. I and I've specialized in working with people with small businesses, small corporations, and things of that nature. That's what I do for a living,
That's right.
at least for
So
now.
at least for now.
At least till this writing gig takes off.
That's right. Until it finally picks up and you maybe get your name out there. So yeah, and that's exactly what we want to talk about, right? We want to talk about the things you need to think about as a third party publisher or any independent role playing game publisher, and everything as you're doing the back end side of this stuff, right? The business side, the side that nobody ever sees and nobody ever talks about, and there's a good reason why you don't want to talk about it with all your adoring public and stuff. It's because it's a grind, it's a gruel, it's horrible, but it's something that you can't ignore, right? And so let's just dive right into it. Bob, what are the things that a third party publisher needs to think about when they're about to get started or they've gotten started and they're moving through producing some kind of product?
Do you want to start with our disclaimers?
Oh yeah, why don't we start with some disclaimers?
Yeah. So, despite being a tax professional, nothing that I am talking about tonight can really should be construed as tax advice. Everyone's situation is different. Every tax situation is different. So, when in doubt, consult a local tax professional.
Yeah, and there's a good chance that we'll be talking about things that have to do with building businesses and legal stuff and everything too. So nothing that we're going to talk about tonight is legal advice,
Yeah, likewise.
right?
None of us are attorneys.
None of us
We
are
may be
attorneys.
judges, but we're not
That's
attorneys.
We're
right.
all judges, but not attorneys. So you should definitely listen to what we're saying, take it with a grain of salt, and then go talk to your own professional team, either a tax consultant or an attorney, and figure out what that really means for you.
For your
Uh,
specific case.
yeah.
Exactly.
So, one of the ways in which you could define yourself, as a business is either as a hobby business or as a real business. Am I saying that right, Bob?
Well, it's either a hobby or a business.
That's
If it's a
right.
hobby, it's the IRS does not treat it as a business at all.
Okay.
And so there are differences in how those are handled. So first of all, as a hobby, if you are making money from your hobby, your deductions, right, the expenses you can take against that, are limited to your income. Right? You can never post a loss on a hobby. It doesn't matter how big of a bath you take on something. If it's a hobby, that's it. You can wipe out the income. Um, and that, of course, is different for businesses. Businesses can post losses, but the way that the IRS looks at them, the first thing they're going to look at to determine whether something is a hobby or a business is if it's run in a business like manner. If you're keeping records, right? If you just like, well, I've got this crumpled up wad of receipts. Here's my Walmart statement, whatnot. They're just going to say no. This is not being run in a business like fashion. Um, they look at how much time you are putting into the activity, right? If you're putting in an hour a week while working a 40-hour week job, they're going to say this is not an this might be a business, but it doesn't have active participation, and that again limits your deductions. Are you doing it for fun, or are you doing it to try and really make money? Right? I mean, there's a lot of cases where people are like, I really enjoy doing this and I make a little bit of money. Well, that's great. That's a hobby. And if you're trying to really generate a revenue stream, it's a business. One of the things they look at, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it is one of the easiest tests is if you've posted a profit the last three out of the past 5 years, that goes a long way to show that it's a business and not a hobby. There's things like that. Can you expect future profits to come in from your work? That helps declare it a business.
Okay. So there are differences and they matter. That's what's important. Yes. So, if you're going to be a hobby, how does that work? You just do whatever you're doing and keep a couple receipts and
how much
you spent?
Well, definitely because hobby income gets reported, right? All income gets reported to the IRS. If you're not doing that, you're already doing things wrong. So hobby income, like some business income, goes on what's called a Schedule C, and you're gonna put in that, but how expenses get handled is a little bit different. So you definitely want to have your expenses and detail them out, but hobby expenses go on Schedule A, which is your itemized deductions. So if you don't say, because of changes in the code, if you don't say have like a mortgage and you're paying property tax, or unless you're making a lot of charitable donations, chances are your hobby deductions aren't going to even come into play. And I'm sorry, I misspoke. Hobby income doesn't go on Schedule C. It goes now on like 1040 Schedule 1, I think. But you don't get a dollar for dollar deduction necessarily with hobby expenses. But the amount of expenses you have, you want to make sure that you've got those receipts, because the IRS can ask. And if you don't have them and you've actually been able to deduct them, you're going to have a problem. Now, if you end up not itemizing, it really doesn't matter. You're just declaring the full amount of the income and you're moving forward. Because it's a hobby, and that's what happens.
So that's something, think about what that means, because the reality is you need to consider that income as part of your income. So when I'm pricing out a product that I'm selling, it's not, let's say I'm putting on a Kickstarter. It's not just the Kickstarter, 10% and everything, or 9% that they take. There's also, I need to set aside some money off that product to be able to pay for those taxes and stuff, right?
Yeah. And obviously, if you're pulling in large amounts of money, let's say your publication pulls in, 5 figures, you really should be structuring yourself as a business at that point, right? Yeah. If you're making more than a couple $1,000s for the hobby, you really need to start looking at if you can make that next step into a small business, because it will make a difference.
Okay, excellent. So what's that look like? What would a transition from hobby to business look like?
Well, you would certainly want to get a hold of your state and file for some sort of corporate entity, right? Whether if you're doing it by yourself, you could file for like an LLC, a limited liability corporation, or you could incorporate, or if you're working with someone else, you could form a partnership, or like an LLP, a limited liability partnership, things like that. At the end of the day, the IRS essentially has 4 categories. Like LLCs don't really exist in the eyes of the IRS. You have to declare what they are. So if something that's a sole proprietorship, for example, that's what the IRS calls a disregarded entity. So it runs through schedules on your tax return. And then you've got essentially a mini tax return within your tax return. Here's my income. Here's all of my expenses by category, and that just plugs straight in. If you have a partnership or a different form of corporation, they file their own tax return. Partnerships and what we call S corps, which is an election you take. I won't get into that too much. They have a tax return, and then those numbers flow back through onto your tax return. So if your business is making money, you've got income coming in. If the business loses money, you have deductions. And finally, a regular corporation, or what is referred to as a C corp, is its own entity. It pays its own taxes. It is wholly separate.
Okay. Ed, any questions?
One thing that I thought might be useful to point out, since you talked about the expenses involved in like a crowdfund kind of event, would be the timing of it. I remember hearing, and I don't remember who gave me this example, but someone that they knew, or maybe it was their own project. They had done a Kickstart like in the third quarter of the year, received this income. Their project did not go to printing until into the next year, and so they had this big bunch of income in one year with no expenses associated to it, and they took a bath on the taxes on that income. Now I don't know the particulars. I don't know what set up that specifics, but just one thing that struck me as that point was made, because income, regardless of what route it goes, because this income is it's going to be tax liable in some manner or another, and so you want to keep just that one little piece of it in mind with respect to timing your how you do things.
Well, and there's additional things to consider as well, but I would say you never want a Kickstarter. You never want your funding to come in like December. You want time to spend the money, mm-hmm. because that's the easiest way. Now, for example, if you're running an S corp, for example, right? The next year, you're going to take all of those expenses that you weren't able to take, right, mm-hmm. Against that money. And if you don't have enough income, you could end up posting a loss, which can help you in that tax year and perhaps even carry back, depending on how far it goes. Or used to. No, you can't carry back anymore. You have to carry forward. That just changed. So it can help you recover some of that money, but that's on the federal side on what you pay. If you're also paying state income tax, that's right out. That's gone. And God forbid you also have to factor in sales tax, because if you do, all of that money is coming out based on a lot of factors. You really want to try and get as much of your money spent before the end of the year. Mm-hmm. I've been involved in a couple of projects as a writer where towards the end of the year, I'm working my deadlines in like March, and like, well, I want to pay you now, like, but I'm not done writing. Yeah, but it's the end of the year. I'm going to pay you now. Oh, okay, yeah, no, I get it. I'm all right. Yeah, I'm good for the words. It's all good. You don't want to get caught hanging and have to try and get money back. You're better off. It's just a lot easier mm-hmm. to tie things out.
And one other thing that I think bears pointing out, there's, like Trevor was saying, different people have a different level in terms of how this plays out for them. I'm more of, at least in terms of, or at least let me put it this way, this is not my full-time job. This is a side gig for me. However, even before I started treating it more like a business, I think I always thought it was advisable to keep track of everything. conduct as much as you can by email, and then file those into folders where you that are associated by topic. Keep track of what you spend and what you spend it on. You know, whether or not it ends up playing out in your tax situation, you're not going to reach a point where you regret having that information.
Exactly. With a lot of our clients that we deal with, we put together a full financial picture. I mean, we take every bank statement, every credit card statement, we put it all together, and we look through and we go through everything. And the reason we do is it's always better to have stuff that you can't deduct than not have the stuff you can deduct.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, get yourself a copy of Quicken. Using Quicken is as easy as entering information into your checkbook, and just put everything into Quicken, put it into categories, and then at the end of the year, you've got all that information in a single report. You can break it all out, and so
Right. You won't regret whether there may be things that you decide, oh, turns out I didn't need that, but it's better to have it.
Yes.
So, with all that in mind, obviously we need to think about the value added, or the cost addition on top of those things, the taxes you're going to have to pay to the profit that you've gotten, depending, and now you need to think about when you're bringing in that money and whether you've spent it and all this stuff. Quicken is a good idea, getting Quicken so you can basically have a business checkbook, I guess what it is, or a statement. For people who this is all kind of above them, this is not something they've thought about when they think about producing their products. Where can they go beyond contacting someone like you professionally? But are there good resources they can find to read up on how they should comport themselves, what that should look like, how things should be kept, what those statements should look like, and things like that?
Well, there's a couple places they can start. First of all, if you are specifically trying to figure out how things should be handled with your business tax wise,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, does the IRS have publications for you? Right. I mean,
Yeah, like mind
As in
numbing.
actual helpful publications?
oh
Yes.
yeah, oh yeah. Now,
Yes.
I mean,
Oh, yeah.
people always talk about how complex the tax code is, but I'll point out that every year they used to send out the tax books, right? Every year you used to get one. And they had a bunch of questions listed in the back. And this shows you how detailed things get. One of the questions was, if my child is kidnapped, can I still claim them as a deduction on my taxes? And their answer was, it depends. Because if they're kidnapped by a non-custodial parent, while that non-custodial parent has committed a criminal act, as their parent providing upkeep for a child, they can claim them. If they're kidnapped by a stranger, you can continue to claim them until they're either found, turn the age where they're no longer dependent, or they're declared dead. It's a grim example, but it shows you the IRS has answers for everything. There's small business tax guides. There's all sorts of stuff. You can also walk into most bookstores in the business section. There's a whole line of books from like J.K. Lasseter's, Prentice Hall. There's a number of books out there to help you with the tax side of things. When it comes to what sort of records to keep, other than my answer, which was just keep everything. If it's a piece of paper, just put it in a box and hang on to it. Well, and that really is the best answer. You want to keep everything. But for bookkeeping and things like that, the reason I recommend Quicken, for example, like I said, it's easy to use, just like entering stuff into a checkbook. You can put in all of your accounts. You can classify the accounts as business and personal, so that at the end of the day, you can pull at any point, you can pull a cash flow report, which is virtually identical to a normal corporate profit and loss statement that's going to show everything. And if you want, you can really go overboard and you can have it print out in detail and it will show every single transaction in every category. And in case of like an IRS audit, that's your first line of defense. Well, I mean, your tax person never go to your own audit, but that's the first thing they're going to be able to show is here's the detail. And then the IRS might say, well, okay, these things here, we want more information. And that's when you're getting your statements. That's when you're going back and getting purchase orders, invoices, whatever you've got to back that up. But those sort of general accounting things are in some ways they should be common sense, but they're not always. But if you're keeping good financial records, you will never go wrong with anything. Keep track of everything. I mean, come on. You need to know how much money you've got left in your bank account just to live, right? So these are good habits to get into, and they carry over really well to a business. For starting the business itself, again, there's a lot of really good books out there that talk about how to write a business plan. This is how I want to structure my business. This is my goal. This is what I want to do over the next few years. And not only does that help you with your business and trying to keep you on point and have realistic expectations, but if you're doing well and you want to get a business loan, generally they're going to want to see a business plan. So having that ahead of time gives you more opportunities moving forward.
So there's also the American Society of Small Business Owners or something, ASBCA.
I think there's a few groups, yeah.
Yeah. So you can look up small business associations. There's the American Small Business Association, I think is what I'm thinking of, which is part of the government, right? They actually
like the SBA, yeah.
Yeah, they give you tons of there's little YouTube video tutorials on what you can do. There are additional. They talk about how you build a business plan, what needs to go into it, and everything. So there's a whole bunch of material there that can get you, into the weeds a little bit and get you started. So I know when I was transitioning over, I watched a lot of their videos and read a lot on their website. They have publications as well. So those things were helpful, because I'm not trained as a business person, right? I'm trained as something completely different. That was
Well, and the function of the SBA is to help small businesses, right?
mm-hmm.
Besides like the SBA loans that went out during COVID and things like that, the SBA has a lot of programs. They want you to succeed. Technically, the IRS wants you to succeed too, because the more you succeed, the more taxable revenue is being generated. So, I mean, the government wants you to succeed, just maybe not for the reasons that you would like, but they're on your side mostly.
Another resource point that I think bears mentioning: if you live in an area that has a decent-sized public library, you can, like, for example, if we would go to the main branch Cincinnati Public Library, the reference section that they have and the government documents section that they have is quite substantial, and so the librarians there can be quite helpful in terms of directing you to the latest copies of things.
Oh my God, yeah, the Cincinnati main branch is. I used to do a lot of research there, and remember, before we had the internet, we were always able to call the reference desk at the local library. Mm-hmm. Reference librarians are more than happy to point you in the right direction to whatever you need.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what are the things we have to think about other than, I mean, we started out thinking, is this a hobby? Is this something more than a hobby? Well, okay, maybe it's more than a hobby. Then I probably need to, make it a business of some sort and make it legitimate. Okay, so now you've determined what level of business you've got, whether it's a partnership or a sole proprietorship or a corporation or a limited liability corporation or all of those different varieties. And then we've talked a little bit about record keeping and stuff. What else is there? What other things do third party publishers really need to think about other than keep every single piece of paper in a box and label it by year?
right off the bat, the moment you decide to become a business, even if you're just going to be a sole proprietorship, however you're setting up, if it's going to be like an LLC that's just you, I would still recommend getting an individual tax ID number, which you can do through the IRS website online. Takes 5 to 10 minutes, and you can get your number in a PDF acceptance letter when you are done. So
There's
you
a
can,
lot of things that you
yeah,
need that number in order if you want to take part. You
want
know,
to
if
have
you
a
want to
bank
use
account.
yeah, if you want to use
Yes,
Stripe, yeah, there's all kinds of there's that's a very useful thing to cross that bridge.
yeah.
Yes, because otherwise, and here's the kicker: if you don't have that, because technically speaking, you can have your own little self-employment business going on without a tax ID number, but all of that income is being reported on your social security number. And so if there is ever any doubt with the IRS, you're going to need to fight to show that that income is business income and not hobby income. You always want to think ahead. Audits aren't common, right? I mean, most people will go their entire life, they'll never be audited, but you should always be prepped. If I were to be audited, what are they going to look at? Having a tax ID number divides that income. It shows an exclusive revenue stream, which of course also helps in proving it's a business, not a hobby. But yeah, it allows you to get a business credit card, business banking, work with Stripe and a number like PayPal, and have them generating reports. So that's one of the things you're going to want to get. You're also going to need to look at your local state laws and say, okay, well, does this particular type of business require me to get a business license with the state? And if so, what are those requirements, and what am I going to have to pay every year? What do I have to file every year? Um, in some states, if you don't cross an income threshold, you don't have to file anything. In other states, you have to file with the state, you have to file with the county, you have to file with the city. So you need to look at that and prep that. And then you need to look at your actual business activity. Are you going to be required to collect sales tax? Well, if you're going to be, collecting sales tax, if you're selling things, it's not as simple as it used to be. It used to be you get a sales tax number for your state, and you're only paying sales tax to your state. And that is changing. More and more states are demanding that you collect sales tax if you make sales in their state. And so you need to look at ways to get that handled. And there's companies that you can find online that will handle all of that for you, and say, okay, this much sales tax for this state and things of that nature, because that can be a real headache.
And
But
and there are like places like Etsy and eBay and Patreon, right? They pull that sales tax based on wherever that person that is placing that order or whatever is at. If I remember correctly, is that correct?
I believe so. I know that eBay does. I'm not positive about PayPal. I haven't done a whole lot of sales through PayPal. Um, but
Yeah, I don't know
that's
about PayPal, but I'm pretty
I
sure,
believe Etsy does as well.
and Patreon does as well, because when I look at the people I support them, and then I get charged sales tax based on Ohio sales tax. So I'm paying an Ohio sales tax on top of, like, if I'm supporting Bob Brinkman at, I think it's $5 or $10 a month or whatever I support you at, I'm actually paying something like 565 or something, because they're pulling that tax out. And I'm assuming that Patreon, that's part of their
That's that's
service.
that's part of them. And so what happens on both ends, right? So if you are, as part of your business, if you are paying out sales tax, well, then you want to certainly be recording that. Those are taxes that you are paying. On my end, right, or on the receiver's end, if you sell something for $10 and there's 50 cents tax, right? So 1050 has been collected, and that is the income number that will be reported to me, and I need to keep track of those taxes that were collected and paid out, because that's also a line item for me.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that that I think about is I don't like making sales outside of any one of those systems. Like, I mean, Kickstarter collects tax and they report that tax separate. I never see it. So does Patreon and things like that. And that prevents me from having to think about individual sales tax items like, oh, I need to send the state of Oregon 3 cents,
Yeah.
right?
I think that alone is justification for not doing your own e-commerce. I mean, there's having that sort of thing handled by an e-commerce platform that you're selling your product through. I mean, to me, that's priceless.
Well, and the thing is, I don't know as a lot of people really understand this, because it's a change that's happened a little gradually over the past few years. 10 years ago, this wasn't an issue. If I lived in Illinois, I'd get an Illinois sales tax number. If I sold stuff in Illinois, I collected sales tax. If I sold it elsewhere, I didn't. I shipped it to another state. It wasn't sold in my state. I didn't have to pay sales tax over there. That's not the case anymore. There is a network of connected states. There are people that are still catching up on this. There's people that are getting caught out on this. And sales tax audits are something you never want to go through, because those are very angry auditors to begin with, in my experience. And like, okay, well, you've stolen money from our state and we want it.
Yeah.
And that's their viewpoint, and it's not wholly incorrect. So yeah, you don't want to get caught short on sales tax. Unpaid sales tax is the easiest way to have a business shut down by your state and local governments. They don't mess around with sales tax. You can go to prison for not paying sales tax.
Yeah. So
a lot easier than income tax issues.
Something to consider. What other things do we need to think about? It can't all be tax related, but I mean, are there other things? Are there advantages of the different types of businesses? Is it all tax related? Is that
a lot of business structuring really is tax structuring.
all about tax structuring, right? But
it's just one of those things. But
going to conventions, right? Those are deductions for those of us who are going there to do things. Like if I go to Gary Con and I'm specifically going there to play test adventures that I'm about to publish, right? That's a job suddenly, mm-hmm. right? And that trip should be deductible.
Sometimes it even feels like one.
Sometimes it even feels like that, darn it. Yeah. So obviously then all of the records, your mileage, things like that.
Your hotel receipts.
Your hotel, your food.
Well, and I'll stop you at mileage, because there's something very important. You want to do more than just keep track of your individual mileage. On January 1st, you want to, midnight, New Year's Eve, you want to write down the mileage on the odometer of your vehicles. You want to write down the mileage of the odometer of your vehicles the next New Year's Eve. So you've got that full year's mileage. Because if you're using a personal vehicle for business expense, you still get to deduct part of that. But the percentage you get to deduct if you're running like a sole proprietorship it's all based on your percentage of use.
So you have to estimate how much of the vehicle's usage is related to business purpose.
No, you're not. They don't want you to estimate. They want you to know. They want you to have a written record. And that's one of the things, even, the most basic of tax programs, if you're going through and they're like, okay, beginning of your mileage, end of your mileage, business mileage. And then they'll ask, is there a record for this mileage? And the next question is it a written record? The IRS wants a written record. There's circumstances where, yes, you can show the information without having that written record, but you want that written record. If you are driving from your home to the Indianapolis Convention Center, you want to jot down that mileage. And you might not be able to do it right at the time. You can Google the distance between your house and the convention center. Okay, that's how far I drove. You know this information, but you definitely need that information.
Yeah.
So when you say know that, what you mean is you want to have recorded specifically the trips that were made, and probably I presume the dates that they were made.
Yes.
Um, where you would record, okay, in this date I drove to Indianapolis to do a Gen Con. It was X number of miles. So you've got that tabulated very specifically.
Yes, and the date is important for a couple of reasons. It's important if you're running a small business and it's just you, right? And so it's that. And if you're running a larger business, let's say that you've got people working for you and you're paying them a travel per diem. Well, the federal allowable per diem rates change about halfway through the year.
Hmm.
And so you need those dates because that can come up. What am I allowed to say? Okay, this is how much I'm paying this person for travel. You need that. You need that information for mileage rates, for meals incidentals, all that stuff. You need your dates. That's very important.
And there
So
is, if I remember correctly, a standard mileage rate that the IRS puts out in terms of this is how much you can deduct per mile, regardless of
Yes.
your specific
Yes.
vehicle or whatever. It doesn't matter. Here's the standard number.
Yes, and that changes from year to year.
every year it goes up a little bit. So, which is good, right?
Which, if it kept up with the rate of inflation, it'd be better. But yes.
It'd be better.
Right.
But you can get a small mileage logbook for $12 on Amazon.
you
Uh,
you don't even you can buy just a small little spiral bound notebook for 50 cents.
Yep.
That's all you
And
really need.
so
Just this date went here this many miles.
yeah.
And let me tell you, if you show up in an audit and they ask about your mileage and you pull that out, they will be very happy with you, and it will go a long way to establishing your credibility with an IRS agent. Yeah, I've got these records, and here's my log. So these are just good practices to be in to begin with, but it's all about defensive planning, right? You as a business owner, you certainly want to take advantage of every single thing that the law will allow you to do, right? You don't want to pay more in taxes. You don't want to run into unreasonable delays with getting things set up. All of these things, when you do them proactively, help you down the road.
Are there any good podcasts or things like that you would recommend to people?
Ooh, now see, as a tax professional myself, I don't listen to any tax
Anybody else's
podcasts
advice? Yeah.
because, well, it's not just that. I mean, my father does taxes, I do taxes, and if the two of us are in a room and we start talking taxes, we'll clear a room, right? um, we have fun, but that's about it. But I would say that if you're serious about what you're doing, I would not suggest going to any of the big tax chains. It's not in your best interest. They're looking to do quick turnaround tax returns, and while several of them can really educate their preparers, that's not what they're there for. Find a local enrolled agent or CPA or other tax professional in your town, and talk to a few of them. Don't just go to the first person. See what sort of questions they ask. They should want to see a couple years taxes leading up to this, so they have an idea of what you're looking at and what they're looking at. If they're not looking to see your past taxes, don't just don't. They're going in blind, and they don't know enough to know they're going in blind. There's You've got to be careful with tax professionals. You have to be careful with anybody you're giving your financial information to and you're identifying information to. So ask around, see if someone already has a tax person. But yeah, like H&R Block and Liberty Tax, they're not really there for complex tax consultations. They're there to turn around tax returns quickly. So you're not going to have a single point of contact. Find someone that is going to be a single point of contact, and figure out what you can afford. And tax preparation rates and data entry rates and things like that for bookkeeping vary, and while you get what you pay for in most cases, sometimes you can't afford to get the highest tier of service. Tax professionals can run anywhere from like $30 for a tax return to $150 an hour. Well, yeah, you can get a lot for $150 an hour, but you probably don't need that much.
Okay. I got to tell you, this is the weirdest interview we've done, Ed, in terms of, there's no new content. It's just all. But I do think it's really important. And so, as we see a proliferation of third-party publishers, as told by the copious number of Kickstarters that have been going on this year, and everything. I mean, at one point, I think in February, we had 23 DCC Kickstarters at once. There's a lot of new people trying their hands at this. So these are things to think about. This obviously is something that could be incredibly daunting for somebody who has never had to think about this stuff before and is a little paralyzed on it and everything. What's your advice for the person who has maybe already done a product or two and is now trying to tackle this topic? How do they make it tameable?
So you take it in steps, right? So you've done a project or two. So maybe this has been your hobby, and you're looking to transition to it being a business. The first thing, start taking a look at the different business types that your state offers. Right? Some states offer LPs and LLPs, and some don't. And so look at that list of what they offer, and then stop and say, okay, I have no idea what any of this means. So let me take a look. What's the difference between a limited liability corporation and incorporating? How are these things different? I see that in some states, like if you live in Florida, you pay a different price every year for those things. So
And do those things change by state?
Oh,
is
yes.
the concept of a
Because
limited liability corporation, is it different in
yes,
Florida
each
than Delaware?
state has its own rates for all the business entities, because you do that at a state level. The states get to set how much they're going to charge, and then the federal government says, okay, well, it's great that that your state offers an LLP. That is not an entity that we recognize for taxes. So then when you go to get your tax ID number, they're going to say, well, how do you want us to treat this? Do you want us to treat this as a corporation, as an S corporation? And so when you look at everything the state offers, before you spent penny one on the business end of things, understand what your options are. And when you understand all of the options your state is giving you, you will already understand the lesser number of options that the federal government is going to give you for tax purposes. There's legal protection, there's tax protection. And that's the other thing. You can also, if you're completely paralyzed by this, you've read through this stuff and it's not even Greek to you, it is pre-Rosetta Stone hieroglyphics to you, then consult an attorney. Attorneys set up businesses all the time. You can certainly find a local attorney who can set up a business for you inexpensively. You can find other professionals that will handle all of the structuring for you. Well, do I actually need, they're offering me this book so I can record all of my meeting minutes. Do I need that? No, you don't need that. That's a third party that is sending you postcards that look official, because you'll get a lot of junk mail. So you can also go to someone who can help you through those first hurdles. You can talk to people who do bookkeeping and who do taxes, and you can say, hey, I want to do my own Quicken files. I don't know how to categorize this. Can you give me a list of how I should categorize things? And any good tax professional or bookkeeping professional or CPA should be able to say, yes, here's a list. These are the categories that you should be using for your business. It's up to you to kind of figure out where you think things fall. And then I'll go through, me personally, when I handle things, I go through and I double check they're done right. But you can get that. You can get a lot of help if you just ask for it. And sometimes you might have to pay a little bit, but you're going to pay a little bit. So that's kind of the easiest way. Just know there's professionals out there who are willing to help you. Reach out to a friend that already has a business, and they can probably give you a little bit of advice on, hey, when I was starting out, this was a real headache for me. Don't make my mistakes. Here's how I handled it. You can get advice and gauge whether or not you want to act on it, because at the end of the day, you are the responsible party.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Ed?
we talked about a number of the various things that you need to keep records of, and we've already discussed the importance of that. One thing that I wanted to touch on quickly is let me say, for example, come back to the mileage issue. All right, you guys both talked about having a little booklet that you, for example, could keep in your car. These various things that you need to keep track of, when we say paper trail, so to speak, we're not necessarily talking physical copy, right? You could have a spreadsheet where you track things, or Quicken you mentioned.
Yes. They have lots of mileage apps too. I mean,
that's a great idea.
Right. So, I mean, and it can be I think actually, I've honestly never used one, but I've seen several where they just sit on your front screen and you tap it and say, here, blah, 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 done, and it just logs it for you. It takes you just a couple seconds.
But here's the thing. No matter what you do, while you can keep it in spreadsheet form, you can keep it in a notebook. If you're called in for an audit, you need to provide them with physical paper.
Okay.
So however you do it, you need to be able to access it and print it out.
Okay.
Or you need to, every once in a while, they'll take electronic copies of things, but generally that's things like your accounting records. They might say, we want to see your Quicken file. But for the most part, they want paper. I've dealt with audits where we have turned over 10 file boxes of paper, and that was just the initial document request, right? So while you don't necessarily need to keep it on paper, you need to be able to put it onto paper. Mm-hmm. The IRS wants physical proof. Now there's great programs, for example, and like mini scanners you can buy to scan your receipts in. And that's a fantastic idea, because most receipts these days are thermal, and
they fade
you let
quickly.
them sit too long, they'll fade, mm-hmm. or they'll blacken, and they're useless. And that way you've got those, and if you need to print them out again, you can. Mm-hmm. But you definitely want to make sure that any records you have, you can provide physical copies of.
One other thing that I would like to mention with respect to these records is lean towards the side of specificity. For example, I've got a spreadsheet where I'm tracking on this given project, here's my expenses, and I could just say $100 for art. Well, I say what specifically I was getting, who I was commissioning it from, what the date was. Likewise, when we're talking about miles, I went to, rather than just saying 40 miles, it seems to me that you're going to, it doesn't hurt to have the specificity of here's where I was going, what I was doing, this kind of thing.
You actually raise a very, very important point about specificity. And that is, if you are paying an outside contractor like an artist, and you pay them more than $600 in a year, depending on how they are paid, because if you're paying them through PayPal or Stripe, that can be handled differently, and the reporting can be done differently. But if you say, cut someone a check or something, and you've paid them $600, you have to issue them a 1099. You have to report those payments to the federal government so they know to tax that money on the other side. And
Yeah,
that's where things can get sticky, and that's where
yeah,
fines can add up real quick if you don't.
I keep a spreadsheet with I issue work orders, and so those are contracts in kind of mini contracts between the artist and myself. It's like, here's the specific job, here's what asset number it is, because every art asset that I bring in has an asset number, so we can track it. Um, this is what you need to do for it. This is how it needs to be executed. It has all the instructions, and then it'll say this is how you're getting remunerated and when you're getting remunerated. And then so I have a spreadsheet that tracks, here's the work order, here's how much we agreed on, here's when it was paid, here's who it was paid to, here's what it was paid, what was being paid for. And so yeah. So sometimes that's really helpful, because at the very end of the year, when I need to generate data to send to my tax people for those for those 1066s or whatever they are, 1099s. I just reorganize that data, cut that year out, and then I can organize it by person, and subtotal it for every person and say, this is what I paid Bob, this is what I paid Nancy, this is what I paid Jerry, right? And so yeah,
Well,
that's pretty easy.
and again, while I'm not giving out specific tax advice, right? Everyone's
Yeah.
situation is different. Keep in mind that let's say you've got three people you paid $600 to and one person you paid $500 to. My suggestion, based on my personal experience, would be issue 1099s to all four of them. I've gone into audits and they've said, well, prove you paid this person that money. Well, it was $500. We didn't have to issue a 1099. Well, we want you to issue a 1099. And so we've, in early days, we had to go back and issue a 1099 at the request of the IRS. And that person could get bent out of shape because they didn't claim that money, but that's their problem because they should have claimed that money. So, when in doubt, if you're already issuing 1099s, just 1099 everybody.
Yeah, I mean, and the only people, like, so I also have international artists,
And that's different.
so that's a different issue altogether.
Well, yes. So for most cases that you would deal with in our industry, right, in the role playing game industry, if someone is doing contract work, if they're writing by the word, or you're paying them, for art, so long as they are doing the art there and not here, under most circumstances, you do not need to file any form of 1099 or anything of the sort. There are cases where it does come up, but a lot of times it really doesn't. So I will give everyone a quick example, because it's not telling tales out of school. Everybody knows that we at Sanctum Media work with Ashraf Braden, who is in Uganda.
Yeah.
And all the money we get from his stuff, we pay directly to him. He is writing it in Uganda. It is essentially, technically speaking, it's contract work. We do not have to file any paperwork for him because he owes no U.S. tax. If he were over here, if he was a Ugandan national over here doing that work, he would have to pay U.S. tax on it. But in that specific case, he does not. So we don't have to file anything.
But you do need a record of the fact that he
Yes.
is a Ugandan national, right?
Yes,
So there is still a form.
Well,
that you get.
there's all sorts of ways that you can handle that. Specifically for Uganda, it's very easy. There's only one way you can send money to Uganda, which is Western Union, and you need to provide Western Union with scans of their federal ID from Uganda. So we have all of the information that we need at our fingertips.
Yeah.
But other countries, you might have to jump through a few other hoops to just make sure that you're safe. It's not that you're going to be in trouble for not issuing a document to someone in another country that doesn't need a document, but you could be in trouble if you can't prove they're from that country and don't need that document. Because the IRS will always err to the side of the U.S. government.
Yep. Well, this has been as always, an excellent conversation, Bob. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Are there any other things we want to talk about tonight? And like I said, this is totally unlike, any of our other interviews. So, and Ed and I, although we have experiences, we probably don't want to talk about them. So, what else do we need to stay on this in terms of dealing with the business side of third party publishing? I think we could maybe make a list of takeaways. One, document everything. Make sure that you have all the documentation you need. Keep it protected. Two, what would the next one be? Make sure you've consulted a professional so you know you're doing the right thing.
Check your local state laws on how things are handled.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that it's not just state laws. Like, I'm thankfully outside the city of Cincinnati, but Ed, you're inside the city of
No.
Cincinnati. Are you outside of it too?
Yes.
Yeah. So, the city of Cincinnati collects its own income tax. So large cities, I don't know about the small cities, but sometimes cities collect their own income tax, and you'll know if that's the case because there'll be a city deduction on your own 1099s and everything, right?
Yeah.
Because they'll be taking money from you, and stuff. So if you need to check with your city because you don't know if they are taking income tax on top of it. So thankfully, I'm outside the city limits, and it's just one less hurdle.
Well, there's things you don't often think about. If you live in an area prone to disaster, if you live in Florida where there's hurricanes, if you live in California where there's wildfires, don't just keep everything, scan it.
Yeah.
Scan it, store it off site. You want to keep those records for at least 7 years. If you've made a big equipment purchase, since equipment gets depreciated over time, you need to keep those records for as long as you've got that piece. So you need to be able to collect, collate, and store your data for a long time and make sure it stays safe.
Let me give a quick plug at that point for off-site backup. There are any number of services that you can subscribe to. I personally use iDrive, but there's also Carbonite. There's any number of these services that you just pay a small fee. Really, it's not that much, and it automatically backs up whatever designated folders you have on your computer to an off-site backup. That to me it's so worth, it just from a personal standpoint, but how much more so when you're taking it to the level of having a business, and you've got these records that are associated with it, but you may also have digital assets. If I have how much time and money invested in, say, a digital layout of a book and all the content that, and I've got that on a system that dies hard, maybe a lightning strike, and I don't have a copy of that's stored off-site at some backup service, I've lost a real valuable asset. So for all those reasons, whether you're doing this from a business standpoint or you're just doing this for because you enjoy it, trust me, having worked in IT for 11 years, there's two kind of hard drives: the ones that have failed or will fail.
Ones that will.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, it's bad enough, right, if your home computer crashes and you didn't back up your photos. You've lost your photos, and that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
If it's your business computer and you haven't backed it up, you've lost your business.
Yeah.
And you are starting from scratch, and that's really bad. I also would highly recommend Carbonite. They are HIPAA compliant, after all. I would also say that while a lot of people like to put things on like maybe Dropbox or Google Drive, as a tax professional, we tell our clients not to do that. Our job is to make sure that everything is absolutely secure as possible. And the IRS now requires us to make sure things are as secure as possible. And all it takes is one person on the back end because they can access those folders should they choose. And I mean, routinely they don't. They're not allowed to. They're not supposed to. But all it takes is one person, and your data is not as secure as something like Carbonite. Is someone going to go after you specifically? Not unless you're a multi-billion-dollar company. But people are out there that will hack into anything these days, and if you've got it in something that is not well protected, you could just be swept up with a lump of things. So keep security in mind.
And using services like this to operate on an automatic basis, that's another thing. Any number of times I've interacted with someone who says, "Well, I'll just know that I have to make a copy of it." The first 2 or 3 times you're going to do that, and then you're going to forget and never do it again. Something that automatically backs up, runs each night, and any files that change, it puts them up to this offsite service. And offsite is another key thing, because again, if you have a fire, your computer and probably your backups are all gone. So offsite, automatic, trust me, it is worth the expense.
We had a lightning strike in Florida. My entire tax practice on that computer vanished. Thankfully, we had incremental backups going on, and I lost a day's worth of work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not too bad. I can do that work again and not bill for it. That's just fine. Tax professionals, bookkeeping professionals, and backup services exist to provide peace of mind. If you are tossing and turning at night, afraid of the taxman coming for you, afraid you don't have your bookkeeping right, or afraid that your business is going to disappear in a lightning strike, address it.
Yep.
I'm sure your audience is asleep by now.
Undoubtedly, we put them all to sleep, right? I don't think it's just you, Bob. I mean, it's such a serious issue, and yet at the same time, it's not the thing that we want to think about as third-party creators, right? We want to make it so that it takes up the least amount of time possible, and so that's important to think about, right? Is how can I make, if I have to do this, and you do, how can I do it in a way that is, the least intrusive, the least time consuming, the least amount of effort on my part, even if it perhaps costs a little bit more money. And if you look at this and you say, this is all too much, I'm just going to make it a hobby, then, I'm just going to leave this as a hobby, then understand what being a hobby means. And so again, just because it's a hobby doesn't mean you shouldn't consult a tax or a legal person.
Well,
and it doesn't mean you're not paying on that income as well.
Yeah, and how you treat your business is reflected by how people will treat your business. There is a large gaming company that I will not name and have not worked for, that a number of years ago, a person that I know was looking to invest in that company, and he went out and he visited their headquarters, and their bookkeeping for authors that they owed royalties to were notes scrawled on 3x5 cards that were just all over the place. There were people they owed money to that they didn't even realize. And he went, nope, I am not investing in this mess because it's a mass of liabilities for me. How you present your business and how you take care of your business is a reflection of you, and you need to treat it that way.
Yep. I think that's probably a good note, even unless anybody has anything else to end on. It's been a shorter Scrivenery, but I think a useful.
You're still awake, a warm cup of milk should take care of it.
That's right.
Count sheep.
So I'm going to take, before we totally sign off, I'm going to take just a 30-second self-indulgent plug. I've got a Kickstarter that is midway. Cosmologia. It's a manual of planes for DCC. So if you're kind of person who likes to hop between the ethereal, the astral, the elemental planes, and planes of shadow, and all these other kinds of things, and deal with the exotic adventures and hazards therein, then check out Cosmologia, and I will drop the link to it in the chat.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, I don't actually have a Kickstarter running right now. It's a rarity, but it's how it works. But I do have a Patreon you could go look up because I've been building a fusion setting between DCC and MCC called Earthcrawl.
Nice.
And every month you can get a physical limited edition product mailed to you. Bob, yours is in the mail.
Yeah, I
So
would say I'm a backer.
Bob's a
So how do
backer.
people find this, Trevor?
They can go to patreon.com and they can look up Earthcrawl. That's the easiest way to do it. And it won't be hard to find. It's the only Earthcrawl product on Patreon or the web. And so because I spent a lot of time looking things up before I chose the name. Yeah, so it's a fun little product. It's going to take me about a year, I think, to get to the final project. So I'm expecting it to actually go to publication and everything next year. And so people who become backers are getting on the ground floor and they're able to comment on the things. I put out 2 weekly updates, design diaries on Mondays. They go out at 9 a.m. and weekly pedias, which go out on Fridays at 9 a.m. So one went out this morning. And each of these covers a different aspect of Earthcrawl. The weekly pedias are dealing with like jargon words or concepts or things like this. I actually have a extensive glossary I've already written that I keep track of. It's one of the ways I keep track of things when I'm world building is I am like, oh, that's a cool name. I'll throw it in the glossary. I'll define it, and then it's always there for me to go back to. So I take a screenshot of one of those and I talk about it every Friday. The design diaries are more like in depth. Hey, I'm thinking about building this way or that way or whatnot, and so it leads to a lot of good conversations. And the Patreon supporters get to throw their 2 cents in, and I make changes based on that input. So this is a way you can get in and get some feedback on a world as it's being developed. And so it will be different next year than it is this year, which is great. It keeps me working and keeps me motivated to get stuff done.
Nice.
So and Bob has a Patreon as well.
I would say I've never had a Kickstarter and I don't have a Kickstarter, but I do have a Patreon. You can find it at patreon.com/sanctum media. It is the Cult of the Dictionnaire Infernal. I am taking a French book of demonology, originally released in 1818. I'm translating the entire work into English, and I am adding DCC content for every entry. Since the question came up on Reddit, it is not. I'm not writing a monster manual. Granted, I love monster books, and there are monsters in this, but it also has included new magic items, a new character class so far, NPC write-ups, new special abilities and forms of divination. There is also at the $8 level, there is the I put out a poll for my $8 members for which entry of that month they want to see another piece of content for, and that has included a new spell. We've done a monster. Even at the $1 level, you get something every month, which in that case is a monster. But I'm having a whole lot of fun with it. It's really neat. Going through this, and they're like, well, according to these traditions, they say Adam, and they're talking about the biblical Adam was the first wizard. In this particular tradition, they say he was an alchemist. So, and these people say he was a giant. So Adam is written up as an NPC. He is a giant wizard. So there's all sorts of stuff. I'm having a lot of fun, and hopefully people will come along for the ride.
Yeah, and I'm a backer of
Yes, we mutually back.
Yes, we mutually back.
Right.
We basically just shuttle money back and forth to each other.
Yeah, Patreon does that for me. It's really cool.
It is actually really cool. So that has been a boon. But yeah. So I've backed the Infernal Dictionary, and I enjoy reading the readout. I don't get to read everything that you put out, unfortunately, because I've been kind of busy lately. But I really do like. I back at the $8 tier, I think, and if I remember correctly, and I take part in the polls, and I'm like, oh, this month, there's usually about 12 options, right? And so
So
because
I do an option for every entry, and I do at least 13 entries. We just did our fourth month, so we've done 50 entries so far.
Yeah.
So there's been 50 pieces of potential extra content. So and these are all ideas that I think are going to be kind of fun to do anyway. So I've also added something where for every 25 paying backers, even if 25 people sign up today at $1, that would count as a group of 25. For every 25 paying members, all paying members will get a bonus release. I'll write up another one of those pieces, and everybody gets it. So just because I like giving people value for their money. We're at like 32 pages of content in 4 releases, and 3/4 of that is DCC materials. A quarter of that is the dictionary. So
So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing what it becomes. I think it's going to be a great project. I don't know what format it's going to take in the end, but it sounds like a
I'm
project that
having a blast.
I'd like to print and bind myself and everything and stuff. So it's definitely something that piques my interest. So yeah, and I love, and the one thing I like about Patreon is the periodicity to it, right? So things pop into your inbox kind of on a weekly or semi-weekly basis, depending on how that Patreon is set up. And so then, if I have enough time that week, I can get involved, or I can always go back to previous,
Hmm.
Patreon things and say, okay, I finally got time to think about this, and here's my 2 cents on it. So that's kind of
And
fun.
there's some great DCC Patreons out there. There
Yeah,
really
yeah, there really are. Yeah,
we live in a period where we have an embarrassment of riches.
it's true, true. Because there's also Stennard by Nick Barron,
Daniel
and
Bishop's, where
Daniel
he's
Bishop
doing
has
the
one.
book of the book of or the tome of mundane animals. My God, that's one of the most useful things I've ever come
Nice.
across as a judge.
Yeah. And then also James Posnell has Netcrawl.
Yep.
I don't know what he's going to do with it once Netcrawl gets published here in the fall, but it's been an interesting Patreon to
Yeah.
experience.
There's a
Um,
lot of great stuff out there.
yeah.
So
So there we go. We've livened it up. But there's our plugs.
Hmm.
Bob, if someone wants to reach out to you specifically about the things we've talked about, since you've now identified yourself as a professional, how can they get a hold of you?
well, they can reach out to me either by Facebook Messenger, or they could drop me an email at privateertaxes@gmail.com. Understand that if you've got a small question, I can probably answer it for you. I'm not taking on a whole lot of new clients these days, but I'm always happy to help where I can. And if someone's got some basic questions or they've got some concerns, I'm more than happy just to take the time and help you out.
Yeah, and that's privateer with two E's, folks. Don't forget it's
That's
got two
right.
E's. So, all
Giving
right,
turning your tax return into a letter of marque and reprisal.
All
the
right.
way it should be.
All right. Well, on that note, then, thanks for watching us, folks, for another episode. And thank you, Bob, for coming on and providing some great and very helpful information for our viewers.
Sure thing.
And,
Yeah.
folks, we will catch you all later.
Yep. Have a great
Bye, everybody.